So it appears that the way wealth is distributed between generations is startlingly unequally divided, and we've got the graphic to back that up.
I know you are all shocked to learn it. Joining us now is Team Rising, Maximilian Alvarez. He's a writer and host of the Great Working People podcast, and Patrice Onwuka, senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum. All right, let's throw up the graphic.
Yeah. This is my trollish tweet that we turn into a segment.
But this is important, actually.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
You just see it so starkly how millennials, younger people, I mean, forget about Zoomers, like they're totally hoes, but how millennials are getting screwed. And Max, like, then you wonder why Bernie Sanders is winning overwhelmingly among this generation, and there's a complete rejection of neoliberalism, complete rejection of Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, et cetera, for a new, more radical politics. Like, gee, wonder why.
Story's right there in that curve.
It's right there.
Right there. Right? I mean, look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm confused because I've been told, my whole life that it's just that we're entitled and we don't want to work hard, and that's the only problem with our generation. Meanwhile, we have no wealth. We have negative wealth, right? There's no upward mobility, the way that there, was even when it wasn't, like as great as it could have been in the past in this country. It lays everything, like you said, just completely bare. It shows you why, not only younger folks are searching for a new way of doing politics, but also why the kind of old bromides about self-determination and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and American meritocracy ring so hollow for so many people. And it should be a lesson to any politician or any pundit who is trying to kind of reach people, understand why they're not buying that anymore. And I guess like the only other real point that I wanted to kind of make about this is, I wrote about this in the Baffler a couple of years ago in a piece called "The People Who Stole the World," right? And it was about a book called "Baby Boomers: A Generation of Sociopaths," right? And I know that with like,
would like that.
right, and like obviously, with the OK Boomer like phenomenon, like it is so juicy and great to dunk on boomers, right? But I think that we have started to kind of self-correct and understand that what the real story here is kind of class war, not generational warfare, right? There are plenty of boomers who are doing just fine, and there are plenty of boomers who are not. There are people who can never retire. There are people who are still working into their 70s and their 80s because they have been screwed over by the very same system that has left so many millennials without any sort of generational wealth to, enjoy. And the people who are going to be fine in the millennial generation are those who are going to inherit this wealth, right? The way that so much wealth is actually passed along.
Or who inherited all those tokens of elite privilege. I mean, look, not to pick on him, but Pete Buttigieg, right? You come up in this privilege, you go to the prep schools, you get all the markers of that elite success. But I mean, if you don't happen to be able to grab onto those things and get them and inherit them from your parents, you're really in rough shape.
You are. I mean, I think what's not reflected or maybe not fully captured is the source of wealth. I mean, home ownership makes a difference. Your investments, are you riding the wave of the stock market right now? And I think baby boomers who have much more property, they can be able to, they've recovered from the recession. They've regained their housing prices and all that value.
They retained their wealth.
They retain their wealth.
That's really what it was.
And unfortunately, millennials came of age, and I'm at the very start of our generation, where you graduated into a job market that had 15% unemployment for young people, and so now you're finally getting your foot in the door and starting to build and student loan debt, in part because we believed our baby boomer parents who said, "Oh, go to college, we'll pay for it through student loans funded by the government, by the way, which is all student loan driven crisis by the government."
You can't go bankrupt.
But you assume that you're going to get a good job to pay it off, and that hasn't happened. And so while I hesitate to say, well, let's embrace socialist policies, I actually reject that, because I think socialism is just a redistribution of wealth, certainly, but it's a redistribution of misery. We are not all going to live like Bill Gates. We're going to live like paupers. And the idea of AOC, for example, wants us to have universal housing. I don't want to live in a ghetto apartment-style building. I like the house that I'm able to buy. This is what we need to get at.
This is the real argument. And look, I mean, I know it's provocative. I know some of the audience won't like that, but this is the key, which is that it's actually about how you solve that problem. And what I'm really sick of is getting gaslit from a lot of these politicians saying, don't you know, that's what that whole tweet was, don't you know you live in the most prosperous time in human history? Don't you know that you can buy a supercomputer, keep it in your pocket? Don't you know that the TVs on this wall cost less than they ever have in history? And meanwhile, people in the middle of the country are like, I can't buy a TV because I don't have a job. Or I can't buy a TV, I have the same TV for the last 15 years because my healthcare cost is skyrocketing. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. But we have to acknowledge the immense weight of misery that the current system has on so many down at the bottom.
And I am also, though, tired of getting gaslit on we can't afford it when we certainly can afford the multi-trillion-dollar wars. No one ever says it about Iraq or Afghanistan or the military budget that we just upped again just recently.
Right. I mean, what good is national prosperity when you live with a boot on your throat every day? Right? I mean, like, it is not just kind of like the distribution of wealth, right? Working people in this country have been working harder, longer hours. We are more productive than ever. Wages have been stagnant for decades as this wealth and income inequality has gotten worse. The cost of living has kept going up. And people are feeling the squeeze, right? That's why, and yet we're told to kind of be grateful when we get like some kind of low-wage jobs that we can work as a second or third job just to kind of make ends
cover your
meet.
daycare
And this
costs.
is right, and this is like where I would step in, you know, and say like, of course we need to have these sorts of discussions about kind of like long-term ways that we can solve this sort of problem. And I think there's a lot of there are a lot of boogeyman talking points about socialism that we can sit down and talk about in practical terms. But also, I think that this can be a very effective ideological tool where we talk about, we replace the misery that could exist in the future 10 steps down the road with the misery that we are feeling right now and living through right now.
Can I just say that when we talk about misery, though, we also have to take a comparative perspective.
Sure.
And when we look at poverty in the United States, and this is not meant to gaslight at all, but when we compare poverty in the United States, and I have family members who actually live in places where their roads are not paved, and for wealthy oil-supported nations, their standard of living is so much different from mine, and the poorest person in our country still lives very well comparatively compared to a lot of people across the country, across the world.
Let's not forget, though, that if we look at developed, your point is well taken and is an important one. But also, if we look at the developed world, we have people literally dying earlier. I mean, with massive addiction crisis. Like, you have to look at this and say, in the wealthiest country and supposedly the most successful nation of all time, like, how can this be happening? What are we doing wrong that has created this kind of misery in our population? And for me, a politics that doesn't get that, doesn't address that, doesn't speak to that, is a politics that is fundamentally sort of irrelevant to the reality of the American people.
I definitely agree. Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys. Great
Thank
conversation. We'll have more for you after this.